Good evening. Okay. Good evening.
Evening.
How you been, friend?
You doing well? How about yourself?
Well, I'm healing.
Good.
I'm healing up. Tomorrow marks 1 month since I went under the knife,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm doing okay.
Great.
Not,
Mm-hmm.
not ready to climb a mountain yet, but
Yes,
slowly.
but you came out of a major surgery feeling good about it. That's good news.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't right away good. I mean, the stuff they give you can really mess up with your
Mm-hmm.
sense of self. But anyway, getting things back together.
Very
Good to.
good.
I did watch the what I'm going to call the video of the year last week. I wasn't able to get in live, but it was recorded, so I got to watch the proceedings and the take notes. So don't feel too far behind. I was very delighted to see you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how's everything been going over with the church, with your church, and all of that kind of stuff?
Well, we're looking forward to next week. Will be the annual children's Christmas pageant.
Ah, that's nice.
That's nice, and I really look forward to seeing them because um, I'm told that they notice that I'm not there, and I think that some of them might have been a bit worried about it. So I look forward to seeing them and saying, it's okay, I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Good. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I wanted to get logged on. I am going to take a quick intermission before everything gets started up.
Well, you haven't got a lot of time, so I'll talk
I
to you
know
soon.
it.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Father. How are you?
Doing well. Glad you could join us. I hear you, technology was not your friend last week.
No, it was not, nor I it, and it has never been such. Although I do not despair that it will never be such, it was unquestionably not such last week. Anyway, we're doing better. I did see the video. I'm going to call it the video because I'm old and I can do that. Um, I saw the program, the
Right.
recording, whatever you want to call it. So I thought it was very well done. It was an excellent review and a good place to start.
Wonderful. Thank you. We are, so as I mentioned before, not all centuries are equal.
Right,
Um, I'm going
right.
to try and do two per, but some of them are going to require only one.
Hmm.
This evening is going to be a two. In fact, both of them, they're relatively long, but they're not probably not full hours, so we should be out a little bit early this evening. Um, and there are some links for follow-up reading
Okay, good.
in the things there. So um, I will do a once we get everybody else in here, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping. But I'm glad to. I wanted to hop on and welcome you, and I'm glad you made it.
Thank you. I look forward to this. It's been I got 5 years invested so far.
Wow.
hoping this hoping this pans out at
So
some
don't
point.
be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to interact if something doesn't make sense or what have you. Um, I'm still working on the question of testing because I have taught before a number of times. Most of what I teach are languages. I've taught languages and serving the altar. This is
Mm,
the first time I've taught history in a classroom setting. This cleaning you're seeing here, I did for my parish a couple years back.
hmm
But I did not have a syllabus for it right now because I'm honestly not sure which week we're going to cover on what century on what week. So, and as far as testing is concerned, I'm working that out with the bishop right now because I'm kind of leaning into the testing being the canonical exam. And the canonical exam for history will focus, there'll be some questions on every century that you need to be able to, that you need to know about.
hmm
Um, I may end up toward either midway or toward the end, creating some other exams. I'm still kind of conferring with the bishop on that right now, but I will let you know well in advance.
Well, towards the end of last week, the somebody proposed um, the idea of the idea of the canonical exam being the end goal and passing that seemed to go over well. It makes sense to me. I would only invite you to consider a sort of crash and review in advance, a week or two in advance of that. So anybody that's got a question, it bubbles
No,
up.
that's actually a really good idea. What I'll do is we getting toward the end. What I will do is I'll set up a little quiz or something like that,
Yeah,
so that you can think about what we covered toward the beginning, which you may have forgotten at that point.
yeah, yeah. And
Definitely.
my, so, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, absolutely. So, as I recall, we had two gentlemen from the Philippines, and we had a who I think is who's Filipino, but he's in America. Um,
hmm
and I think we're still waiting on them.
Yeah, I feel like Nate's schedule may be hit or miss since he's a airline. Uh, he works for airlines, so
Oh,
he's
interesting. All right, that's
he's
good to
gone
know.
at different
hmm
times. So in
All
fact,
right.
I believe last week he was surprised to be there because his schedule changed
Oh,
last
okay.
minute. So I'm not sure how consistent he'll be in person.
Got you. So let me do a little bit of housekeeping with you gentlemen here, and I may have to repeat at the end if we have other people joining us. What time are we at right now? We are at 6. All right.
Six.
First thing is that this is our last class before the holidays, so there'll be no class on Christmas, and there'll be no class on New Year's Day. We will resume whatever the date after that is. My second piece of housekeeping is, could we move this to Wednesday? This is Wednesday is a working day and it would fit well in, whereas today I've got all the errands to run and it's a little bit harder for me to do this later in the evening. Does anybody have an issue if we move this class to a Wednesday?
No, I laugh because I do a adult Bible study, and we were doing it Thursdays, and I just told them a couple of weeks ago, okay, looks like we're going to have to move back to Wednesdays. And it won't be a problem.
I'm sorry. All right.
It's, it's
Um,
all right. The beauty of this is, I mean, I'm a 30-year retired bureaucrat, so I could just blame you. It's sort of instinctual, sort
there,
of.
there you go. That works well. All right. So that was the first time I'm going to say, so that in which case, barring any objections, we're going to continue this class after this evening. Our next class will be January the 7th, which is a Wednesday, and we'll continue on Wednesdays going forward. If anybody has any problems or issues, please let me know.
Not a problem.
All right. Very good. Good to see you, Mr. Santos. Um, we looks like we don't have the two Filipino gentlemen with us this evening, from the Philippines, and they may have to watch the class and follow up. Um, all right. This evening, as I say, we're going to do two centuries. The both centuries, each of them will be not quite an hour. I'll take some time for questions. During, again, if you have a question, I'll pause at the end of each section for questions, and I'll be at the end. We'll take about a 10-ish or so minute break. I'll do the second part, and we should be out a little bit early this evening, to be able to begin our Christmas holiday. All right. Can you all see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Very good. All right. Welcome to the next iteration, the second century, or the 100, since the first century obviously is 0 to 100. We're going to cover this, the basically trends here is the spread of the gospel. We're going to watch the gospel through both the early apostles and evangelists and the very structure of Roman Empire itself spread very quickly throughout the empire and throughout what was then considered the civilized world. We're also going to look at a certain kind of evangelists, the philosophers, which we'll go into, which is a very unique thing that happens at this time. The persecutions are going to begin. Um, they they happened actually they continue on for quite a while, but I'm going to begin here and cover on the persecutions. The height of the Roman Empire, which is very important for again Christianity is becomes intimately tied up with the Roman Empire later on. Its height in the first century, and we'll finish with British Christianity. And why are you not? Here we are. All right. The nascent church spread widely throughout the Roman Empire, aided by the Roman infrastructure and the Gospels being in Greek, and not long after in Latin. The message of Jesus caused many to
Mhm.
believe and to be baptized. New churches sprung up in every town of the empire. The German lands did not receive the Gospels right away, at least not in any kind of great amount, so we say, due to both language and the fact that the empire was not on good terms with the Germanic peoples. They were mostly suspicious of the Gospel. This is an interesting time because, but I'm not going to go into the individual people involved. Well, we'll go into a few of them, but they're more numerous to count. Accounts of, if you will, anywhere from the peasants to the merchants to the educators to the senatorial class to the military coming to believe in Jesus, becoming Christian, and slowly but surely carrying that message either to those around them or literally leaving and going at the corners of the empire, carrying the gospel with them to make the message known. And you're going to see it in every rank of society, every kind of education. The Roman Empire was a very educated place, so literacy was very strong, which was an incredible boon, incredible aid to the spreading of the gospel. And you're going to see this movement happen. You're going to see it actually spread very, very quickly. I have a little thing to show you. This here is going to go far beyond the ones the first century we're covering, but I thought it was interesting and you might appreciate it.
Father, we don't have any audio if you wanted us to have audio.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I'm not entirely certain how to fix that. Um,
Um,
I'm
Let's see.
let me see here. Well,
well, we certainly
well,
get the
just
idea.
watch it for now. I'm not
Yeah,
quite sure what
yeah,
to do.
yeah. It conveys the idea of the rapidity of the spread, because the clock in the corner is very important, and the just watching it grow is pretty impressive.
The Mongols are a religion.
All right. So I thought that would give you a good sense of the rise of Christianity. Again, we're still in the Roman Empire at this point, but the Christianity by the end of the first century was becoming widespread. One of the most interesting things that happens at this period of time is the philosopher. Philosophy was very strong in the Roman Empire. The Greeks were very fond of it, and the idea of being philosophy, because the gospel spread very quickly among the Jews. They had awaited a Messiah, and anyone who could argue that Jesus was the Christ from the scriptures, was able to make headway among those Jews who were open to hearing. But what if you were not looking for a Messiah? The pagans were not looking for salvation. They sought such things as virtue, honor, glory, and the good life. Schools of philosophy like the Stoics and the Epicureans, among others, needed to be evangelized also, and so other tactics would be needed. Philosophers created a new vocabulary which needed to express the ideas of Christianity. They needed to be precise, and yet could not be words which the pagan used to mean something else. As the gospel spread among the pagans, this new vocabulary was needed to express Christian ideas to those who had no knowledge of salvation or sin. This new vocabulary was drawn from existing ideas, but created to express Christian concepts. Words like arete, meaning strength, or in Latin became virtus, which was to take spiritual strength. Arete was excellence in Greek, but it could easily be adopted to Christian understanding. Caritas, or willful love, charity. The idea of the Greeks had a number of words to express love, eros and philia, and things. Caritas was used to express Christian love. Agape was also used, and you do see it around there. But agape had a sense that among the pagans it was not entirely Christian, and so caritas would be adopted by the Christians to express the kind of love the kind of love a Christian should have. Charis, or grace, the action of God. Charis um, was a less common or less often used word than some of the other words, but which allowed them to take this and really adopt it. If it's a grace and it gets used in a number of places in the Christian vocabulary, for example, Eucharistia, and you can see the word charis in there. That's good grace or thanksgiving. There actually isn't a good translation of Eucharistia, but it was used for Holy Communion. The idea of the ceremony giving thanks unto God, Eucharistia. Also, baptismos, which was the Greek term which was for the Hebrew mikvah, or ceremonial bath. Again, the idea of the mikvah, washing yourself before going into the temple, was ancient. It was known very well among the Jews. In fact, when John the Baptist, and we're going to cover this in our gospel this Sunday, he's out baptizing. The Jews knew exactly what that was, the idea of bathing yourself, ritually preparing to go worship and what have you. The Christians adopted the idea of baptismos, this, which again John had introduced and Jesus has continued, for the idea of the ceremony of the washing and the cleansing from sin. Other terms were also co-opted to describe Christian ideas, and these terms helped early apologists explain the Christian faith. Again, baptismos we just saw, Eucharistia we just saw, also symbolon, or symbolos, pardon me, symbolos, which we get word creed, trinitas, and mysterion, or which became sacramentum in Latin, or sacrament. This early vocabulary, this is codified relatively quickly and early on to not only argue, obviously, with the Jews, but the Jews, you could argue with the scriptures, was to be able to explain Christian terms and to walk through pagans who did not understand. Now, to say that pagans did not understand sin really isn't true. All the philosophers recognized that man was broken, that man had intrinsic weaknesses. So what they did not understand was the idea that it required God's grace to do it. Many of the Christian or the pagan philosophies, especially the Stoics and the like, would put it on man's shoulders to make himself better. And the idea of living a disciplined life, in fact, the idea of even the good life, really had much more to do with a balanced, virtuous life than any kind of living for pleasure. So the Greeks certainly understood this idea, but the idea of relying on God and the sacraments and baptism and such weren't things that were part of their understanding. And these terms were able to help these philosophers to explain the Christian faith to those who did not have any kind of understanding um, of the Jewish faith. The Apostolic Fathers, the disciples of the apostles. This continues on what we've been talking about, but we're going to get into now are some very important figures in the early part of the church who helped define and guide the church. The Apostolic Fathers are those fathers of the church who immediately come after the apostles. This includes a range from the latter part of the first century to the end of the period. It also includes several works that are produced likely from this early period. Key examples are Saint Clement, the Bishop of Rome, who followed Saint Peter, has epistle to the Corinthian church. Saint Ignatius of Antioch, disciple of Saint John and very early martyr with 7 letters. Saint Polycarp, like a disciple of Saint John the Evangelist, Bishop of Smyrna and early martyr. Papias, disciple of St. John also, Bishop of Hierapolis and commentator on the Gospels. The Shepherd of Hermits, which is an anonymous book about various visions that was used by the early church. The Epistle to Dionysius, anonymous early defense of the Christian faith. And the Didache, which is one of the first early Christian catechisms. I just realized I didn't take any questions from the first. Does anybody have any questions about what I've gone over so far? I don't hear any questions. I'll keep moving. The early fathers were under heavy persecution and attempting to hammer out the basics of the Christian faith. What we have is limited and sparse. There was a lack of larger unity or cohesion for the church to unite around, something that wouldn't happen full until the 4th century. Notably, St. Ignatius challenges the heresy of Docetism, which we will cover, which St. John also challenged in his own day. The current best primary source for reading them is Michael Holmes' 3rd edition of the Apostolic Fathers in Greek and English. I will not be assigning that, but I wanted to put that in there in case you're interested in reading more of these fathers. As time goes on, we have limited extant corpus of the Apostolic Fathers and a select number of writings and editions. For example, St. Ignatius' 7 letters exist in both long and short editions. Both versions, the short version is the authentic one. Additionally, St. Clement has only one confirmed epistle, and the later ones are considered forgeries. A number of writings came out. You have later Gospels, later epistles that came out in this time, and which the church had to navigate as far as what was truly and what was not. And the rules, and I'll go into this much, much more when we get into the Bible, as Bible qua Bible, if you will, when they begin making their decisions on the language and finally closing the cover on one authentic text. But even at this point on, we see competing writings claiming to be from the apostolic age.
Do those forgeries tend to be uh close heresies trying to gain the sort of intellectual space and the authority of well-known saints? Is it pretty obvious, like, the goal of the forgeries?
So that's very, very definitely if someone had a pet project or wanted a particular opinion to go through, they might very well. Oh, look! All of a sudden, I found Saint John wrote about this or something. Absolutely. So you had I'm trying to think, and I will. I mean, there's a list of them, and I wasn't thinking about that when I was just put this together. But there's actually a list of several documents that were floating around. The Eastern Christianity has kept a couple of them, but they're not authoritative texts. They're just used. For example, the idea that Joseph had been previously married and was a bit of an older man when he was espoused to Mary. The idea of the presentation of the Virgin in the temple and her dancing on the steps around the altar, both those stories come from, I think it's the Evangelion of, I don't recall who right now. Um, but these are stories from texts that were not included. One of the Wait, answering your question, yes, absolutely. People oftentimes they would look at text. They would see, first of all, was the doctrine sound? They would read over the text. But more importantly, and I'll go into this a little bit right now. The real acid test, if you will, for what decided if a document was truly scripture and was worthy to be read was it everywhere, and was it ubiquitous as being, because it was like the Pauline corpus. There were several epistles that would go everywhere St. Paul went. It was believed he actually carried them with him, although we don't have any actual record of that. But because there's a scandal over the question of who wrote the epistle to the Hebrews. Was it St. Paul or was it not? Because the Greek used in there does not sound like anything else St. Paul wrote. So there's a question of did he write it or not? But that epistle was nevertheless, whenever you received you would receive the scriptures, you would receive these writings, the Gospels and the epistles of Paul, Peter, John, you would receive. So these were everywhere. Everybody had them and they knew what they were. And if all of a sudden something shows up that no one's seen before, oh, we got this from down in Alexandria, they go like, well, maybe not. No, I think we have. So the really but there certainly were forgeries, and there certainly were documents that came forward that had made it look like either like Gnosticism or Docetism or something had been preached by one of the apostles. And so, yes, absolutely.
Question.
Yes.
Do we have any writings or proof that St. Peter was ever the Bishop of Rome, being that the Eastern Church denies it?
Um, we know that he began in Antioch, and Antioch was his first seat. The current primate of Antioch calls himself the Pope, and they think, well, Peter was here first. Um, Peter was in Rome for quite some time. Peter died in Rome.
How do we
Um,
know? How do we know that?
um,
But I mean, we know that he went to um, Rome and that he was executed in Rome. Um, we know that he was in Jerusalem at the um, but what writings and I please don't get me wrong. I'm just I know a little I know more about the Eastern traditions than the Western traditions.
mhm.
So my question is what writings or documents do we have that Peter was ever the Bishop of Rome, being that the Eastern Church denies it?
Um, let me take a look at that. I'm actually making myself a note. Actually, if Perrin, if you who you're with your quick research there, you were doing that last time. If you can find something quickly, let us know. I'd appreciate it. Um,
Yeah, off
but
off
I
the
will.
top of my head, I don't think it's a denial of the bishop in Rome, though, right? It's a denial of the primacy of that position, and that Christ intended Peter to be the
Negative. From what I have been hearing, listening to um, Orthodox priest, and that's one of their arguments
Interesting.
was
Which
that Peter never was, and
interesting.
I don't have a dog in the fight. Uh, but that's what I'm saying is the traditions that I have heard on the early church are not coming from the west. They're coming from the east, and
Uh,
there seems to be a contradiction here.
I have heard of that before. I mean, he was in Rome. He was killed in Rome, and
That's
I
correct.
don't.
I mean,
Um, So
Yeah, I
the
don't.
idea that that he would be in there and not be the Bishop of Rome seems a little bit unlikely. But again, I don't have a I don't know exactly what source we get that from. There's the famous Quo Vadis, "Where are you going?" As he's leaving, comes back, he dies. He was crucified upside down on Vatican Hill, and obviously there's the whole tradition stems from there. But let me
And
look
they
into
would agree with that. They would agree with all of those last statements.
but if one of the three closest men to Jesus is in Rome, why would they think he wasn't the bishop in charge?
Um, according to their tradition, that Peter was merely taken to Rome to be executed,
Oh, all right.
and
That's interesting.
that yes, that Paul was in Rome, but they don't recognize that Peter was in Rome other than for his execution.
Oh, all right. Well, thank you. That's interesting. I've heard Orthodox arguments before about it, but I had not heard that one. So let me look into it.
So Eusebius, there's some fourth century people who claim he was the um, bishop in Rome, but there is much more on just him being there and being martyred there.
I wondered that he was not. They said that it was not actually the bishop. They were just taken there to be killed.
So Eusebius writes that he was the Bishop of Rome.
I think so. I need to track down the reference. I'm seeing a
Okay.
summary of that.
I will. Well, I'll follow up on this, and we'll put it in the notes for the class afterwards, so you can look it up. That's a good question. I actually I've heard something like that, but I had actually not heard that particular one. So, Saint Clement of Rome, Clement of Rome is the immediate successor of Saint Peter as Bishop of Rome, or he may just been the first bishop of Rome if Peter wasn't Bishop of Rome.
There has to
Um,
be a first one. So really,
there
we
has to be a first one.
you could
So we
distill
do
the
know that
last ten
Clement was
minutes
in
into that
Rome.
discussion.
Um, he does write one of the earliest known post-apocalyptic works. Um, the the epistle of, and I believe I have a link to it here. In fact, let me just go ahead and take a look here. Yes, I do. I have a link here, which we'll be able to do. I would like you guys over the Christmas break to read over this. It is slightly unsatisfying in that he doesn't say Clement of Rome to whosoever. It goes right into the subject. There's no name. There's no nothing about it all. It's called the Epistle from Clement of Rome, but when I read it, there was no. He doesn't speak as a bishop of Rome or anything else. He just addresses the subject right away. So anyway, but here's the thing of Rome. You can take a look at this. Um, Polycarp of Smyrna. Polycarp of Smyrna was a disciple of John the Evangelist. Was a tremendously important figure in the early church. He was one of the oldest living. He lived almost as long as St. John did. Ended up dying in 155, and he is very influential in his teaching in Smyrna. Um, he also was taken. Actually, let me go. Can I go back? Yeah, here we are. He was Polycarp of Smyrna was taken and was martyred, and on his way he ends up writing his epistles. So his influence in the early church was tremendous. I've got here the recorded martyrdom of Polycarp and his epistle to the Philippians. Again, I'll have you read those over the Christmas break. Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch was a very staunch defender of the faith. Again, he took over where from Antioch, where St. Peter had been, famous bishop, defender, taken to Rome to be killed. While he's taken to Rome, he's writing these epistles to these various churches. I mean, he was apparently so well known that everybody knew this was going on, and he's writing these, encouraging them, "Don't worry, stay strong." You know, he would not, "Do not come rescue me, do not come take care of me. I'm on my way. The beast will make sweet bread of my bones." And as he's writing these on, he is the first one to speak of the importance of bishops. Wherever there's a bishop, there is a church. The idea of bishops becomes very strong. And the first one to term the term Catholic Church. So Ignatius of Antioch in these epistles is one of the first to begin articulates for us these terms, the idea of a church being established around bishops and calling it the Catholic Church. He died during the reign of Trajan between 98 and 117, was taken from Antioch to Rome in chains and martyred there. And on the journey, he wrote 7 letters, which we still have. They contain a clear expression of Christ's deity and humanity. In this context, he attacked Docetism and those who denied deity to Christ, also the Judaicizers. The Eucharist he refers to as the medicine of immortality, as well as the flesh of our Savior Jesus Christ. He is the first to use the term Catholic Church, as I say in this letter epistle to the Smyrnians, as well as Eucharist. Strong hierarchical and episcopal statements. The bishop presides in the place of God. Follow the bishop as you would follow Christ. And again, a strong desire for martyrdom specifically asked him not to come and rescue him, to let him go, that he was looking forward to martyrdom, and the beast would make sweet bread of his bones. So, Ignatius of Antioch, these men again being very important figures in the early church, not only in their writings, but in their examples and their the areas around them that knew of them and knew of their works. Tertullian was an a prolific early Christian author from Carthage, in the Roman province of North Africa. He was the first Christian author to produce an extensive corpus of Latin Christian literature and was an early Christian apologist and polemicist against heresies, including contemporary Christian Gnosticism. Tertullian was also the first theologian to write in Latin, and so has been called the father of Latin Christianity, as well as the founder of Western theology. He is perhaps most famous for being the first writer in Latin to use the word Trinity or Trinitas. Um, Tertullian, again, was an amazing, immense figure in North Africa, Latin figure, one of the first Latin figures. Um, and his writings are incredible boldness of the philosophical surety of Christianity, boldness for the moral life, for virginity, boldness for confronting these various teachers. Some of them actual, and this applies to all that we're talking about right now. Some of their language is shocking when you read it. It really is. They did not hold back. They would be canceled big time today. Um, they were treatable as antichrists. They absolutely would calm down anybody who spoke against the faith. They did not mix words when it came to defending the faith. Tertullian is our first Latin one.
Question.
Yes.
First Latin. Okay. Up until now, don't let me assume. Most of the correspondence was Greek, in Greek.
So obviously, the people who spoke Latin took it with them
Yeah.
to the various areas. We'll cover British Christianity at the very
Okay.
end. Um, so it was there, but the extant writings that we have, the apologetic writings, the catechetical writings, and any kind of other writing, encouragement writings, were all in Greek. So we don't really have any Latin writings from this period other than Tertullian. So Cyprian will be the next one, who is, I think he's next, either late this century or next century, but he looms large. But most of again, the philosophers and those who were dealing with the Septuagint were all in Greek. And so Greek dominates the
Yeah.
first
Okay.
century or two of Christian works. Coming to the end of the 100s, Origen of Alexandria, and he will loom large also a bit next century. Origen is a very interesting figure. He's a prolific writer, an apologist for the Christian faith, remains one of the brightest stars in the early church. But Origen is a very controversial figure because of his extremity. He was a very extreme figure. And I say there's actually legends that he actually castrated himself to struggle with ongoing sexual temptations. So Origen is not a saint, partly on account of that, but his influence in the early church, especially the end of the first century, beginning of the second century, is immense. Very articulate, very educated, and a very good apologist for the Catholic Church. Um, the Didache, one of the earliest catechisms, that I've had a section from the Didache to read over during the Christmas break. And this is heretics. All right, ready to get rid. So before I get into the heretics, I'm going to go back here for a second. Are there any questions regarding any of these any early philosophers and apologists?
My question is, how do we retrieve these recorded messages or these recorded slides so that we can get the links and such off of them?
So, I will check. I talked to Father Patan on Monday and told him the request. He's supposed to be. Well, didn't Kevin Ayer? You said you've seen them. Where did you go to see them?
Well, what I saw was the first week,
Okay, the
Right.
recorded first
last
week.
week. Yeah.
So
So,
Okay.
where
Um,
did you find that?
um, I would sincerely love to be able to explain the process. I would say it would benefit us all if apparently Father Patan is the guru for that kind of thing to explain how to get there.
Okay.
It was traumatic, but it works. It's uh, well, all of it was bloody well, but my point being, it's worth it. And I was going to mention this at the end of the session, but yes, in the same spirit as Mike. Let's make sure all this stuff is available because what you're burning your way through here is our study guide.
Right.
We need to be able to get it. And
all
I
Mhm.
right.
think if we have ready access to it, I mean, you want me to read something, either slow down because I have to mechanically copy all that over.
No, as I say, so
Um,
again, I spoke with him on Monday.
yeah,
I told him that the request had been made, which is makes perfect sense, and he
yeah,
told me he was going to do it. I
Yeah.
will follow up.
If he can send us out an email, being that we
yes.
don't have an actual platform site that we're working through, if he could send us an email with directions of how to obtain this, that would be great.
And
Yes,
maybe just
absolutely.
for the time being, you could just copy and paste the links of the reading assignments over Christmas break. That might.
Yes, I could.
Yeah.
Copy and paste them what in the chat.
No, you could just you can send them in an email later. Like you
Okay.
just have your
All right.
PowerPoint open and copy and
So
paste it.
this is where again, and I've I only work here as the saying goes.
We
Um,
understand.
I
We
don't actually
understand.
have all your emails.
Okay.
He's still supposed to put this together, and I
Right.
made this request. But I will follow up.
Right.
Um, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. You can email me, Gregory Gregory .seeley and I'll
I
repeat that again in a
I
second.
think we were all on the same email chain at some point,
Yeah.
Okay.
so
Um,
we can find your email through there. Yeah,
all right.
I have your email in my
Oh
Gmail now.
yeah. So it's
Yeah.
Gregory Gregory. All right. Dot Seeley Seeley at Gmail. And if you reach out to me individually, I can um, send this to you. And again, Father Patan has told me he's setting this up here. He's on the process, but I have not seen it yet. And so I want to make sure that you
Right.
have what you need over the Christmas break to look over this stuff and be able to again revisit the slides. So yes, I will we will make this happen. Any other questions about that before I head into the next one here?
No, I think the ability to recall these things, in essence, is going to be a fantastic study guide. And
Mm.
I think we'll all do well in the test if we have a chance to sit with this stuff by ourselves. Like
Right.
what's on the screen now, find it, study it, digest it. We'll do
Right.
we'll do okay.
Excellent. All right. The heretics. Ah, yes, the world of heretics. Heretic is for those who pick and choose what they want to believe in a message. There were those who sought to appropriate the gospel for their own use. These were pagans who saw the popularity of a new religion and looked for similar teachings in Christianity to their own beliefs and sought to conform Christianity to their perspectives. And there were several. First was the Gnostics, pagan philosophers who took the message of Christianity and molded it into a form of paganism. These used mystical and heavenly aspects of Christianity to allure people into Gnosticism. Gnosticism was huge. It was based on the idea of secret knowledge and initiation into the cult. A Gnostic had knowledge the average person did not, and they had elaborate rituals in induction or whatever the word is, initiation rituals and such to their into things. The mystery cults, Minerva, Demeter, Dionysus, Bacchus. They were the existing pagan cults who adopted Christian imagery or vocabulary to increase their following. So you would have them using um, Christian words or Christian vocabulary to try and get people to believe they were Christians, to try and get people to join their temples or what have you. Sabellianism. Sabellian is named for its founder, Sabellius, for the second century, sometimes referred as modalism or monarchianism. The Father, the Son, and Holy Ghost are three modes, roles, or phases of a single person, God. This, of course, implies that Jesus Christ was purely divine, without humanness, and therefore could not have suffered or died. All right, this idea that that God imaged or manifested Himself is going to become very popular with several of these heresies. Martianism. Marcion preached the benevolent God of the gospel who sent Jesus Christ into the world as the Savior was the true supreme being. This God was different and opposed to the malevolent demiurge or creator God identified with the Hebrew God of the Old Testament. He considers himself a follower of the Apostle Paul, whom he believed to have been the only true apostle of Jesus Christ. Marcionism is huge for quite some time. It believes that the gods of the Old and New Testament are not the same God, that the New Testament is its own unique thing. It is a revelation of a loving God as opposed to a punishing God. Um, that Jesus Christ is not related to the Old Testament, despite the fact that he talks about it constantly. Um, and those apostles who reach or touch on that are canceled. So only Paul the apostle is truly the one you should be following. Docetism, which I've already mentioned a couple of times. Docetism comes from the Greek word dokesis, meaning to seem or to appear. Along the same lines as Sabellianism, Docetism says that Christ was not a real human being and did not have a real human body. He only seemed or appeared to be human. In a nutshell, Christ only, no Jesus. So Docetism is a manifestation or an image or an apparition of the divine that looks like Jesus and walks around, but not incarnated, not taking flesh. Monophysitism. Monophysite comes from the Greek words for one nature, monophysis. This heresy says that Jesus Christ was a joining of the eternal Logos with the human person Jesus, which occurred at the incarnation. He therefore is two separate natures joined in one body. Monophysitism actually still exists, is still very much alive in present Egyptian and some Middle Eastern sects of Christianity. Monophysitism says that rather than being fully God and fully man, or having two different natures, they're united into one, usually with the human being absorbed into the divine, but that he only has one nature and not two. Adoptionism. Adoptionism says that Jesus was a human who was adopted by God at his conception, at which point he developed a divine nature. Later versions sometimes suggested he was adopted later, such as when he was baptized by John the Baptist. All right, so Jesus is greater than the Christ. This is the other side of whether the Docetism or Monophysitism. This says that Jesus was born as a human man who was adopted by God. You'll see some of this in Arianism as well. Adopted by the divine and can possess divine powers, divine abilities, or even divine nature, but it was given to him as a human man. Manichaeanism. All right. This Manichaeism is the way Gnosticism embedded into Christianity. Manichaeism is actually a separate religion which blends Christianity with Gnosticism, Mithraism, some Neoplatonism, and even Buddhism later on. Again, it was considered a very serious heresy, survived well into the Middle Ages, which strongly influenced the Bogomils, the Balkans, and Cathars in southern France. If you've heard of the Manichaeans, Manichaeanism, I'm sorry, the Cathars and such, and then what was the other one? There's another one that St. Dominic goes after. I can't think of right now. We'll get to that one later on. Manichaeanism is one of the best syntheses of paganism and Christianity coming together, and continues on for many centuries and plagues the church. Donatism, named for its leader, the great theologian Donatus the Great. Donatism included a group of extreme sects, mainly in North Africa, that emphasized asceticism. They valued martyrdom, found lapses of faith, even under torture or threat of death, inexcusable, and believed that the sacraments required a pure priest to be effective. During the persecutions, many people confessed Jesus Christ and died, and they are called martyrs. However, some were weak and renounced their faith in order to save their lives. They were called lapsi, or those who had lapsed, those who had fallen away. Once the person's persecutions calmed down, many of these lapsi wanted to rejoin the community of Christians. Those who adhered to the sect, adhered to this sect, felt the lapsi were unworthy and did not want to admit them back as faithful Christians. Also, these same people believed that the holier a priest was, the more efficacious the effects were of his sacraments, especially his Mass. Thus, a monastic priest said a more efficacious Mass than a worldly priest, and or a priest who sinned or lived in sin. If a priest was actively sinning or lived in sin, his Mass was invalid. This is the Donatists. Arianism. Arianism is named after Arius. Now, this is going to begin here. We'll carry this on. I'm touching base on this right now, although really we're in the 100s. This is more 200s, but this is gonna bleed into the next century. These heresies get started and they continue for quite some time. So Arius, this is the end of it. This is the kind of the end of it here. But Arius is technically the beginning of next century. But if it's part of the same group of heresies that the church fought, so it's named after Arius, a priest in Alexandria. This is considered the most serious heresy the church faced. Jesus Christ was thought of as a special creation by God for man's salvation. According to Arius, Jesus is God's Son, his most perfect creation and the Savior of the world, but not part of the divine Trinity himself. Arianism was a form of Christianity that the Goths adhered to. It was popular in areas they conquered, including Italy, Spain, and Africa, which we will go into that much more when we get into that. So I think that's yes. All right. And as we finish this, this may not work because if you can't, so I'm gonna try this. This is a video you may not have seen. It is very cute. If there's no audio, I will just send you the link to it. You can watch it yourself. But let me see if I can. No, there we are. Can you hear that?
Yeah,
Can you guys hear that?
It's paused right now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, did you hear the beginning of it?
Oh no, 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 not at all.
No, nothing.
All right, then I'm not going to bother. My apologies. It's very cute. I will if you'll reach out to me, I'll send you the link. You guys can watch this on your own, but I'm not going to if you guys can't hear it, I'm not going to show it. Um but it's a very clever thingy about the different heresies. All right. So, Um, so coming to the end of that there, that's quite a bit there. And we will follow up with all of these because the church is going to condemn them, and various saints or bishops and such are going to argue in the various councils. Were there any questions about that initially? I tried to go through somewhat slowly, but there were several of them there.
It's definitely something I need to. I mean, I've gone through all of this before, but it's definitely something I need to like make flashcards or something for, because they do start to blend together, especially when they're sort of different sects of different ones. I mean, like you have what monophysites. Are monophysites a? I mean, Cathars are Gnostics, but
Right.
yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. Again, we'll cover more of this as we can. This is just an introduction to all of them. We're going to cover them. The councils are called together, some of them to condemn some of these. So this is just an introduction to them. There'll be more, and again, I'll make sure that the slides are available for you. But this is the start of these. This is someone asked me about the question of certain texts and were they written by somebody who had a particular, particular belief and they wanted to make it think it was apostolic. A lot of these heresies are brought on by people who want Christianity to conform to a certain perspective, and they adjust or they twist the faith a little bit to try and make it work, and the church is confronted with this and has to combat it. But yes, again, we'll be covering. We'll go on. This is I wanted to go through each of them, where they came from, what they spoke on. We will go in future centuries. We will look at how the church deals with them and what their effects are. All right, moving on. The persecutions. Um, so the persecutions obviously are going to begin as soon as the gospels are preached, but they take different forms in different areas and are very much not the same. The persecutions, individual ones and the larger ones, are very, very different in their own way. Right alongside of the gospel being preached, violent objections were voiced to this new doctrine. From the Jews, this saw an end to the old law, which some were unwilling to let go. From others, especially the Pharisees, it meant a loss of prestige and position, which they were unwilling to let go of. And for the pagans, it meant an end to their way of life, which many felt was a threat to the gods who would punish them for abandoning their ways. Finally, it was a way to seek revenge for a variety of offenses. And I will cover the persecutions more in the next century. But there were violent sufferings for the gospel as soon as it got started. This is a later one. This is probably a more graphic one, but you had the same thing here. And of course, Nero, toward the end of the first century, burns Rome in a quest to solidify his legacy and blames the Christians on it. And so people begin persecuting Christians, thinking they were responsible for the burning of Rome. Here's the martyrdom of Saint Ignatius we covered earlier, as he's taken to taken to Rome to be beaten by the lions. So again, people who stood up and defended the faith were oftentimes persecuted and killed. What happened here?
Still are.
Yes. All right. That was a brief introduction. I will go into those much more in the next century. Are there any immediate questions before I head into the height of the Roman Empire? All right. On we go. In the year 100, the Roman Empire hit its greatest extension. In a sense, there was nowhere to go but down. The empire did not know it was hitting its greatest expanse, but the expanse came with a growing sense of concern with governing such a vast territory. Social and political problems had already plagued the empire, but its vast size, difficulty in communication, only exacerbated this problem. By the end of the second century, serious cracks in the political and social fabric were apparent. Was there a question there somewhere? No. Okay. Rome was considered to be the glory of the ancient world. The its buildings, its government system, and its language expanded quite a ways, and its influence was felt all through the empire and even beyond. So Rome was a incredible force of culture, civilization, and military. The Pax Britannica, or the Pax Romana, Britannica. Pax Romana was a real thing, and the ability to travel safely around most of the parts of the empire for quite a while really, really did exist. It was also an area of education and commerce. People from all over the world came and learned both Greek and Latin, Greek in the eastern part and Latin in the western part. Um, the texts were available, and education was able to move freely throughout all the areas of the empire. Also, commerce, goods and services were available all through there. Even to the farthest extents in Britain or down areas of Africa, the ability of the access of what Rome had to offer was meant that there was a strong middle class and a certain affluence could be expected or was available to pretty much anyone who lived within the area of the Roman Empire. Roman roads were an incredible part of not only the Roman Empire, its infrastructure, but the ability of communication, and again the spread of the gospel. Roman roads, which we still have, the roads we build today are not even as good as the roads back then. They used limestone stones and then a sort of lime cement that, if it was cracked, when it would rain, it would fill up and solidify it again. So the technique that they used was magnificent and made them very durable. And most of the areas of the major cities and in between were paved with these Roman roads, which again made it very easy for movement around the empire and for the spreading of the gospel at the same time. So the Roman roads were one of the real signature achievements of the Roman Empire. Roman Empire at its height went from Britannica, Brittany up in the north, all the way down well into Egypt and below, into Arabia, and covered a vast area. Um, Really, everywhere the area it was were populated and civilized. The areas of the Germany in the north and farther out were far less populated areas. So anywhere that had wood fertile ground and such, the Roman Empire was able to occupy, so that by the middle about the middle of the first century, the Roman Empire is at its absolute height. The Roman Empire in 117, its actual high point there, and you can see again example of where it covered and everything. So again, the fact that the Roman Empire hit its height in the first century was a huge boon and advantage to the spread of the gospel, because of the fact that they all spoke the same language, or between Latin and Greek, obviously, and the travel and communication were made so much easier by the machine of this empire. Christianity in the British Isles, just to finish off with a little Anglo for the Anglicans here. Christianity in the British Isles. Anyway, before I move on there, were there any questions about Roman Empire, its existence, its structure, what have you, its history, and its relation to the gospel? All right, moving on. British Christian in the British Isles. Joseph of Arimathea is rumored to have brought Christianity to Britain in the first century, along with the Holy Grail. There's even talk that Joseph of Arimathea brought Jesus to Britain in sometime when he was young. There is obviously no hard evidence for that whatsoever. It is simply a rumor. Mind you, there's no hard evidence Joseph of Arimathea came here. However, it is a very common and very widespread rumor. Also, that he brought the Holy Grail with him, the cup of Christ, the cup that Christ used at the Last Supper, that he was brought to England and perhaps still resided there. Grail mythos would feature prominently in British Christianity. It's so ubiquitous and so thoroughly spread that they figured it could not have been made up, although again, we don't have any real hard evidence of it. It features even King Arthur and the Round Table. Grail features prominently in some of the most British mythos, which we will cover later on when that becomes appropriate. Missionaries were in Roman Britain by the end of the first century. They are witnesses to British, and by British at this point we mean Celtic. We do not mean Anglo-Saxon. They will not get here for a little while. These are all British Celtic peoples. Christianity is by the earliest sources. Anybody who writes about the history of Christianity, in fact, there's even a council whose name I forgot the name of the council. Look it up. An early council that British Christians were there. So in the British Isles, Christianity is there before the end of the first century. I actually have a mug that says, Anglo-Catholic, dated year 60. It would have a distinctive Celtic feel, would also be influenced by the Byzantines, have its own monasticism, its own liturgy, and its own internal structure. It would grow up so different in some ways from continental Christianity that in later centuries, when Roman missionaries showed up, they didn't recognize it. Bede, for example, and I'll cover this when I cover him, claims that Christianity had disappeared from the island with the arrival of the Anglo-Saxons, of which he was one. However, we clearly have evidence that there was Christianity there. He either didn't recognize it or was a snob and didn't like it. We don't know. We don't know which one. But anyway, more on this later. All right, as we come to the end of our first century here, um, next time we will have the persecutions, the rise of monasticism, and the decline of the Roman Empire. Are there any questions on what I've presented to you here so far?
Observation question.
Yes.
The arrival of Christianity in the British Isles, as I was growing up, my father was an Episcopal priest, and I was like the only Episcopalian in the 1,000 mile radius of the New England. So surrounded by everybody but the arrival time of the year of Christianity into Britain was a seems to me has always been a point of contention in that um, evidence of a arrival earlier than the official Roman Catholic barge that shows up somewhere around 300 or 400. Um, that has been a point of, I'm just going to say, contention between those who take their lead from the Vatican and
Right.
those who assert an earlier arrival, and therefore some uniqueness which was baked in the cake.
Interesting. I have I read before about it being the idea so that the missionaries were in Britain. That isn't really even a question. Missionaries were in Britain before the close of the first century. Now, how effective they were is difficult to establish. Um, you have the Celtic Church grows, and but you're right. It isn't until it's actually 600 or 599 or whatever when Augustine of Canterbury gets there. Because you also have Bede. Bede is Anglo-Saxon, which is like I think 5 or 6 or 700. Um, and they talk about Christianity having been there and having been pushed out by the Anglo-Saxons. But I don't know. There was a Senate again. So something else I will look up here for you and get back to you. Um, Christianity in Britain, and I want to look up
I think
exactly.
both Origin and Tertullian mention Christians in Britain.
Yeah, I want to say that again. I don't have that written down or what have you, but I recall it being well-known authors, respectable authors mentioning this is the case. So I will look it up and I will follow up on that. But the I do recall that being the case that very early on there was representation and a Christian presence in Britain. All right, gentlemen, this comes to the end of our first century. We'll take a few minutes break. It is right at 7 o'clock right now. So let's do it. Is 5 minutes good enough, or do you want 10? I don't hear anything.
Yeah,
Five minutes is
five is fine. Yeah.
five is fine. All right, very good. Then I will see you all. I have 7:02 right now. I'll see you at 7:07 or right there about. Doing power-wise here. Read this here.
Father Seeley, for it's worth, it looks like while there's not like archaeological proof of Peter um like doing more than dying in Rome, it's been church tradition since Ignatius. Um and it looks like it's the better historical argument, though it's not proved.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
I can send you a list of the pros and cons here. I'll email this to you too.
Hey, Kevin, where did you say that you went to church at? Was it up in Northern Virginia?
No, it's in, if you're familiar with the map of Maryland, in more or less west of the center line, there's the city of Frederick.
Oh, okay, Frederick, Maryland.
Yeah, so my church, the one I attend, St. Michael the Archangel, is just south of there, close to the Potomac River. The nearest biggest town is called Brunswick.
Oh, okay. So you actually live in Maryland. Okay.
Yes, I have accepted that reality for the time being, and we live a life of faith, and one of the elements that I pray for is redemption. But of a variety of things, one of which is beyond my control. Many of them.
I understand.
All right, are we ready to get going?
Ready.
All right. We now leave the 100s and go into the 200s. Our trends, we're going to begin the persecutions. We're going to go into much more in depth on their nature and extent. Also looking at the decline of the Roman Empire, the rise of something called monasticism, and the rise of the fathers, which we saw the beginning of in the last century, bishops standing up and defending. And this we're going to get into really the several key figures who helped define Christianity. The persecutions. The persecutions began as soon as Jesus was born. I didn't need that there. He was persecuted by the Jewish authorities and finally put to death. He predicted his disciples would suffer the same fate. The Emperor Nero began the Great Fire in Rome on the 18th of July, 64 AD. He blamed the Christians, and so began the public sanctioned persecution of Christians that would last for 300 years or almost there. The persecutions had several characteristics. First of all, they were not rational, and they were very often personal. Christians were not lawless people. They paid their taxes, they obeyed the law as long as it was moral, and they were generally loyal citizens of whatever country they belonged to. So there was no good reason to persecute Christians. Most persecutions were personal. A young woman would spurn a man's request for her hand in marriage over someone else. He would denounce her as a Christian. If I can't have her, no one will. Two men would be up for preferment or promotion in military or politics or even business. One would denounce the other as a Christian to get the preferment. Normally, when someone is accused of being a Christian, they were interrogated, and often, if they were willing to acknowledge the emperor as divine and give a nod or pinch of incense to the gods of Rome, No one really cared. This is where the conundrum occurred. Many a Christian just went along and acknowledged the emperor to save their life. This practice was condemned by the church, the Donatists, we covered last time. Anyone who offered incense to the empire was considered to have fallen or lapsed in their faith. If someone refused to offer incense to the emperor and acknowledge the gods of Rome, they were considered a traitor and unpatriotic. The level of torture or punishment varied. We actually have a collection of called the Martyrology. There's a Roman one and an Anglican one for the British Isles, going through some of the stories of the martyrdoms. Some of them are almost too hard to believe. Some of them are amusing, and some of them are quite grotesque. At Marseille, which is in France, the holy soldier Victor, he refused either to perform military service or to sacrifice to idols. Wherefore he was first cast into prison, where he was visited by an angel, then punished with divers torments, and lastly broken in a flour mill, and so finished his testimony. On the same day, the holy martyrs Trophimus and Theophilus, who under the Emperor Diocletian were stoned and burned, and last beheaded, and so crowned with martyrdom. In Bulgaria, very many holy martyrs, whom the profane Emperor Nicephorus, when he was wasting the churches of God, caused to be slain by divers sorts of death, by the sword, by the rope, by arrows, by long imprisonment, and by hunger. At Tyro, a city which formerly stood on an island in the lake of Bolensa in Tuscany, in the persecutions under the Emperor Diocletian, the Holy Virgin and martyr Christina, she brake her father's idols of gold and silver and gave the morsels to the poor, whereupon he commanded her to be torn with stripes and otherwise fearfully tortured, after which a great stone was tied about her neck, and she was cast into a lake. But an angel delivered her. Then she suffered bravely the sharpest torments under another judge who succeeded her father. And in the end, the course of her testimony, under the President Julian, having endured the burning furnace, where she remained shut up and unhurt for 5 days, having by Christ's power overcome serpents, and having had her tongue cut out, was at last shot with arrows. At Antioch, the holy Augusta, Prefect Arminius, who had been distinguished for the highest military service under the Emperor Constantine the Great, but when he rebuked the Emperor Julian the Apostate for his cruelty toward Christians, Julian commanded to be cudgeled, tortured, and beheaded. At Aachen in Gaul, the holy martyr Cassiprius, who had escaped the fury of persecution, was lying in a cave when he heard how the blessed faith for suffering how the blessed virgin faith was suffering for Christ's sake. He was then stirred up to bear witness likewise, and he prayed the Lord that if he judged him also worthy of the glorious martyrdom, that he would cause a spring of clear water to break forth from the rock of the cave, which thing, when the Lord granted it, Cassiprius went back to confidently the field of battle and gained the crown of martyrdom by noble contention. And finally, at Rome under the Emperor Mark Antonine, the holy martyrs Ptolemy and Lucius, of these was recorded by Justin Martyr. The Ptolemy brought a lewd woman to believe in Christ and taught her to honor chastity, for which cause he was accused by an unclean man before Ubicius the prefect. He suffered a long and foul imprisonment, and at last made public confession of Christ's teaching and was sentenced to death. Lucius blamed the sentence and openly avowed himself to be a Christian, for which cause he was likewise sentenced to death, and with them sent to a third of the same condemnation. So there are any number of these every day of the week, every day of the year. Frankly, there's the martyrology. Some of them are very simple. Someone refused, wanted to consecrate themselves or refused or something, and they were killed. Other times, as you can see, you have miracles and you have all kinds of things going toward following under this idea of the cult of the martyr, the mythos of the martyr, which was frankly sometimes to encourage those Christians who might fall away, who might give up the faith, to continue and to hold strong. the phrase that became around was the blood of martyrs was the seed of Christians. More often than not, and in more cases than not, when people saw Christians being thrown to the lions or what have you, kill public amusement, more often than not, the constancy of the Christians converted those who were their mockers, and people would oftentimes be so overwhelmed, they say, with impressed at the peaceful death of the martyrs, that they would come in and join them, or at least that they would convert and they would say, "Wow, if anyone can die with this kind of constancy, I want to believe what they do." Sometimes they were killed for public amusement. If you had Christians who had been brought together, they might, during a gladiatorial trial, or perhaps when there were wild beasts, cast the Christians in there for public amusement. That happened on several occasions. And finally, again, you have here the idea of being let loose of the wild beasts, the constancy. They would pray and they would sing hymns sometimes, waiting for the beasts to devour them and thus die this martyr's death. So the persecutions raged, but they were not at all effective in stemming the faith or getting people in any large number to abandon the faith. All right. Before I continue on with this, do we have any questions about the persecutions? All right, then I will continue. The decline of the Roman Empire, which is a hotly debated topic on when and how it happened. The end of the empire is debated. The fact that it declined is not. You can see here some of the decadence, the famous thing, the flowers of Heliogabalus, when he would, during one of his feast days, when they were lying around feasting and drinking wine, had a sheet up top. He dumped rose petals down on his fellow and his guests there. The 200s saw a steep decline in morals, social ethos, and political acumen. There was no ruling family in Rome. The title of Caesar, and later Augustus, was open to anyone who could take control of Rome. We saw this when Julius Caesar entered Rome as a conquering hero who was killed by the Senate a few days later. Octavian established the empire, becoming the first Augustus, and a year or so before our Lord was born. That by the year 100, cracks were forming. By the 200s, potential Caesars were killing each other for the office, only to be killed a few days later by another rival. The political chaos in the 200s in Rome was incredible. Personal ambition and neglect of the public good caused many to cease to trust in the government. The wealthy began to flaunt their wealth, while those in the outskirts of the empire became disillusioned by the idea of Rome and its empire and began to cease to be loyal. You had in some areas where they would have opulent feasts and live very Roman, and other areas were former Roman establishments, forums, circuses, and such were repurposed, and where the poor could live in what had been the glory of Rome. The By the end of the 200s, areas that had once been very populous, and with the markets and the schools, which had once flourished all over Rome, began to be neglected and repurposed, and a sense of decline and decay was overwhelming. By 117 AD, you have more of a division of this. You have senatorial provinces and imperial provinces. The areas in pink there tended to be the wealthier areas, where people who had money would still live and were much more Roman. The imperial provinces, they began to the were less the areas were less wealthy, and people. You also had at the beginning, and this is a little early for this right now, but you began to have Germans come in from the areas and begin to hire in to do the work that the Romans had once done as the Romans pulled in. So you see a real pulling in of wealth and influence and such to the center of the empire, and the outer parts of the empire are going to be run by the government. The people with money and influence are going to flee, and you're going to see those areas begin to deteriorate.
Is there a legal difference between the imperial and the senatorial provinces?
Um, as far as I understand it, the your the senatorial provinces were still ruled by individual senators, and they made sure that they were personally involved and things were going well and running smoothly. For the imperial provinces were probably just hired governors or what have you, and were far less interested in doing their job. I don't. I think the laws all stayed the same. It was a question of how they were applied, but that's actually not an area that I'm especially familiar with.
Mhm.
The crisis of the third century, also known as the military anarchy or the imperial crisis 235 to 84, was a period in which the Roman Empire nearly collapsed. The crisis ended due to the military victories of Aurelian and with the ascension of Diocletian and his implementations of the reforms of 284. Diocletian implemented a number of reforms designed to save the Roman Empire. He divided the empire into smaller districts, mostly based on language, but also on economic and military concerns. He revitalized Roman culture, and this included the cults of the Roman gods. Any dissent was met with ferocious retribution. This is where um, the great persecution of Diocletian. Diocletian did not persecute the Christians because they were doing anything wrong. Rome was falling apart. It was collapsing under the weight of being so big and being ungovernable. And Diocletian divided the empire into different sections, and anyone who was not Roman, did not love Rome, the gods of Rome, the language of Rome, was going to die. He felt that the gods of Rome had abandoned Rome, and Christianity was not the only religion persecuted. This was the one great persecution. In order to restore the greatness of Rome, he implemented a persecution of every religion that was not Roman, and Christianity was not the only religion persecuted. Diocletian divided up the Roman Empire into different sections, and you can see the colors here: the yellow, the green, the green here, the kind of dark, or the darker pink, and then almost purple. These different sections were had by different rulers: Augustus and Caesars. The 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 Augusti, plural, if you will, had the areas that were more important, and the Caesars less important. But there were two Caesars and two Augustuses or Augusti, and they ruled these different areas and areas of the Roman Empire. So the Roman Empire was divided up. This people often say that this was done by Constantine when he became the first Christian empire. It was not. It was Diocletian that did it. And he did it much earlier on in the 200s. All right. Before I move on to more on the Christianity, are there any questions about this um, collapse of the empire and above all Diocletian and his persecutions, which differed from the previous ones? All right, as I hear no questions, I will continue. Christianity spread among the nations. Um, as the Roman Empire began to go down, where it began to fall apart, and other nations, other peoples began to come in, the gospel actually hopped the borders and began to spread even farther than the Roman Empire. So, where initially the Roman Empire was really the contained Christianity because of the languages and because of the ease of travel, this began to change. By Britannia and the Christian faith. By the third century, Christianity was in Britain, from Asia Minor to North Africa to Central Europe to Western Europe, etc. The faith it was developing. Notably, Tertullian, who was the Latin author in North Africa, says, For whom have the nations believed? The Parthians, the Medes, the Elamites, those who dwell in Mesopotamia, Armenia, Phrygia, Cappadocia, inhabiting Pontus in Asia, Pamphylia, sojourning in Egypt and the regions of Africa which lie beyond Cyrene, Romans and settlers, and the Jews also in Jerusalem, and other nations, so thou even the various tribes of the Gaetulians, and many of the territories of the Moors, and all the borders of the Spains, and the diverse nation of the Gauls, and the places of the Britons, inaccessible to the Romans, yet truly subject to Christ. He's mostly referring to Scotland at that point. and of the Samaritans, the Dacians, the Germans, and the Scythians, and many of the hidden nations in Providence Islands unknown to us, and which we are scarcely able to enumerate. In all these places, the name of Christ, who has already come, reigns. This is Tertullian against the Jews. He The idea of the superiority of the Christian faith and how it was taking over an argument again defending the Christian faith. Another testament of Origen, and you can really see here the language of the time. The whole earth shouts with joy. Even the miserable Jews admit that these things are proclaimed concerning the presence of the Christ, but they foolishly disregard his person, although they see that what has been said has been fulfilled. For when, before the arrival of Christ, did the land of Britain agree together in the worship of one God? And when did the land of the Moors do so? When did the whole world do so and at once do so? Again, the idea of the how the Christianity was pulling together these various peoples and making such inroads. All right. Any questions on the rise of Christianity before I launch into the rise of monasticism?
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry, one question, if I may. Slow on the mute button. Um, to what to what extent was the spread of Christianity organic versus organized missionary efforts at this point? It seems to me like I would guess organic, but I don't know how how capable the institutional church was in the first 2 centuries.
Um, it was organic in the sense of usually, and then we'll get much more into this as the centuries go along. What you would have is you would have bishops send um, clergy out, and or they would make them bishops, make someone a bishop, and send him off to a place to establish a church. So people who did this were most commonly, I mean, vast. Again, the first century, you did have your random peasant, you had your random nobleman or what have you who believed and would. Wherever he went would bring Christianity with him. As the churches continues, what you're going to see are bishops taking their priests, making them bishops, and sending them off somewhere to start a new church. That's most of what you're going to see. Um, the idea of um, we don't really know as far as the idea of like how cohesive was the liturgy, how cohesive was anything else. We don't really know at this point in time. The uh, the the accepted scriptures, and again, what you generally would have again were bishops who would send off one of their proteges off to start, and so it was they would usually relied on bishops to make sure that whatever they did uh, was was organized, coordinated, and orthodox. But that's about as close as you're going to get, I think. All right, the rise of monasticism. With the second century and the beginning of the fall of Rome, a new type of lifestyle will be born. And this is the monk and the idea of seeking God one on one in by leaving of the world to do so. Seeing the societal decay, chaos, and disorder, many fled the decadent cities. They found solace in the Egyptian desert, and the first they're called the Desert Fathers and Desert Mothers. Their lives were once asceticism, prayer, and fasting. They sought spiritual wisdom and closeness or union with God, but this union was fraught with struggle against the devil. The Egyptian desert exploded with cities of hermits. Now, all through here, the idea of the Nile overflowing its banks and the sea here, men would go down there and find caves and find areas and begin living these lives of isolation or in very small groups, getting together to pray and then separating to work. And the food was very. Was there a question? All right. Um, the the number of people, this thing exploded. You can see a map here of all these different areas where the monks would way up into the Nile here. You can see all along here how they found men who were living out. You have Alexandria and you have in Egypt here around that area to a point, but even farther out in the desert, hundreds of miles, you'd go along, mostly following the Nile, and you'd have people there living these lives of asceticism. Whole cities of men who looked like John the Baptist dotted the Nile and filled up the Egyptian desert. It was hot enough that they did not need to worry about excessive clothing. They didn't need to keep warm, and so the amount of food they had to eat was minimal compared to places which got cooler. So the heat of the desert allowed and again, they would find shelter away from the sun, but the fact that it was hot means that they didn't have to eat as much, and so they could live lives of extreme asceticism. St. Anthony in the desert is probably the most famous one. He's the first one to flee the desert and live alone as a hermit. So St. Anthony is the first recorded. We don't actually know who the first, but he was one that is said to have set the example. But many were known to do this. During his time alone, he was tempted by demons. They appeared in all sorts of horrible forms. He was assaulted both spiritually and physically. However, in the end, he triumphed. There is the book, The Life of Anthony, written by St. Athanasius, which I will cover later on, um, who writes this. He meets Anthony, who comes in at one point in time into Alexandria, and he meets him and he writes a biography of Anthony. And it is truly one of the most hagiographic things, talking about how the devil would appear to him as a lion, as a dragon. His bed would be on fire. He'd be thrown off of his bed. He would be attacked physically, and on and on and on. The description of the temptations of Saint Anthony are truly incredible. Um, and it's the idea of whether they really the internal or external, we don't know. After many years alone, disciples began to approach him and later to live near him. It was called a skete. So he was discovered by people wandering along, found him and found him to be a very spiritual man and began to live, and they called it sketes, collection of little huts around a church. They studied and worked and and ate alone, but they studied and worked and ate alone, but came to the church to worship. So this was the beginning. Initially, they lived entirely alone, and there really were no they say around the church places of worship. There were no priests really. There's actually a saying among the Desert Fathers of avoid bishops and women. Women want to marry you, and bishops will want to ordain you. And this was a desire to live a life radically in union with God and not have the distractions. So there were churches, but they really only where you pray. There were no sacraments per se. The sayings of the Desert Fathers and Mothers became a collection of wisdom. People would go around and ask someone for spiritual wisdom to take with them. They would go visit St. Anthony and say, give me something, give me a word. Sometimes very insightful, and sometimes too mystical to really be useful. They're put together in a collection called the Philokalia, which is the primary spiritual book in Orthodoxy, Eastern Orthodoxy, which is the name of Eastern Christianity, which we'll cover much more later on. So the Philokalia begins with the Desert Fathers, and it's a series of that go in and visit. So give me a word, Abba. They would come and they would visit a desert father or they would visit a hermit and they would say, give me a word. Here's some examples. Abbot Elias said, for my part, I fear three things. The moment my soul will leave my body, when I shall appear before God, and when the sentence will be given against me. The old men said of Abba Agathon to Abba Elias in the desert, he is a good Abba. The old man answered them, in comparison with his own generation, he is good. They said to him, and what is he in comparison with the ancients? He gave them this answer. I have said to you that in comparison with his generation he is good, but as to that of the ancients, in Scetes, I have seen a man who, like Joshua the son of Nun, could make the sun stand still in the heavens. At these words they were astounded and gave glory to God. Abbot Elias, the minister, said, what can sin do where there is penitence? And of what use is love where there is pride? Abbot Elias said, I saw someone who was carrying a skin of wine on his arm in order to make the demon blush, for it was a fantasy. I said to the brother, of your charity, take off your cloak. He took off his cloak, and was not found to be carrying anything. I say that so you may not believe even that which you see or hear, even more observe your thoughts, and beware of what you have in your heart and your spirit, knowing that the demons put ideas into you as to corrupt your soul by making it think that which is not right, in order to turn your spirit from the consideration of your sins and God. You have this, the idea of someone saw him doing something and it was a temptation, or he really wasn't doing what he appeared to be, or someone misunderstood. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. It's called the Jesus Prayer. It was memorized by monks out there because there were no books. There was nothing to you would go to the church and you would read. You could only had what you could memorize. And this was a life dedicated to prayer, solitude, silence, and sorrows for one's sin. And then there were no possessions, so prayers were memorized. Psalm 51 being the most common. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy mercies, according to the mercifulness, do away mine offenses. Monks would go in and would hear the Psalms, or if they could read, they would read the Psalms, and they would memorize parts, and they would hang on to these memorized parts. There are tales of monks memorizing vast portions of the scriptures. Much of that's later on. There really isn't. Most of the Desert Fathers are stories to inspire people to virtue and to dissuade them from spiritual pride or dissuade them from thoughts of the world and such. Um, Also, Desert Mothers. There were women that did this. There are far fewer. Many of them were closer to Alexandria than the open desert. But there were women who still went out into the desert. The most famous one is Saint Mary of Egypt. Saint Mary was a very successful prostitute, and the rumors had it that as well she made good money. She actually really enjoyed it and would go around and looking for clients, going to the various cities. Apparently, she was very beautiful, and men would find it difficult to avoid her and such. So she went around mostly in Alexandria looking for clients until one day she walked into a church to try and entice clients in a church. And as she approached the door, she was stopped by an invisible force, unable to enter. As she stood there wondering what was going on, she all of a sudden had the realization of her sinfulness and fled right away into the desert. Going into the desert, the legend has it she lived entirely alone for the remainder of her natural life, seeing no one, crying for her sins. We don't know how long she lived. Until just before her death, she came out of the desert and met a monk who baptized her and gave her Holy Communion, and then she died. So again, very heroic and very dramatic stories associated with the Desert Fathers and Desert Mothers. Saint Pachomius, he was the first father to create a rule. The monks lived in communities, usually huts surrounding a church called a cenobium. The word Cenobites instead of hermits who lived alone in lauras or lavras. So, one of the problems with the Desert Fathers was many people would go out there and try and do this, and after spending some time, years or who knows how long, would end up losing their courage and leaving. Or again, it was a very solitary life, and there was very little guidance. Would leave and would go back to the world. And so, some of the more wise of these Desert Fathers began to pull their disciples together with them and began to live in communities. Um, these are not the communities of the Benedictines, if you're familiar with them, where they live in very tight. These are still huts and such around, but they're getting closer and closer to the abbot and closer to the church. The idea of lauras or lavras, the U and V are the same in so in Greek there's only the V, they don't have the U. The Latin has the U, but it would so you see both lauras and labras. But a laura, you've heard of like a baccalaureate, which a bacca and laura. Laura means crown, like a crown. So a lavra or a laura was a crown or a gathering, and bacca is berries. It's a crown of berries, is a baccalaureate. So that's where that came from. So these were how these hermits lived. Before I go into the rise of the fathers, are there any questions about the beginnings of monasticism? Going once, going twice, onward and upward. The
Thank you,
rise of
Father.
the fathers. Valiant bishops stood up and defended the faith and morals of the church and became standard bearers and examples for the church. Their names and teachings, after the scriptures, go as a go-to source for Christian teaching. The fathers were, again, they began with those who immediately followed the apostles, as we saw last century, those who knew the apostles and heard their teachings. These are bishops who succeeded them not long after and continued on in these teachings. And as these problems came up, and they're mostly the heresies we discussed last time, as they came up, would come forward and defend, and their defense. Their closeness to the apostles and the doctrine, the way they defended, means that the writings of the fathers are oftentimes what's cited as the correct understanding of a given doctrine or teaching. Irenaeus of Lyon was born in Smyrna, was a disciple of Polycarp. Irenaeus became the bishop of Lyon, which is actually a Latin province, although he was Greek. Was noted for his defense of his faith, the faith against Gnosticism. Again, these bishops wrote oftentimes extensively defending the faith against these various heresies, and these writings again make up behind the scriptures our most valuable resource of apostolic teaching. Cyprian of Carthage, Bishop of North Africa. Cyprian challenged Donatists and recovered Donatism, which was the lapsi who had fallen away and did not want to come back, and they did not want to let them back in again, and the teaching that the holier a priest was, the more efficacious his mass, and priests who live in sin, it's not efficient. Oh, he fought the teachings on baptism, the faithful and unfaithful bishops. So Cyprian of Carthage would be one of the main opponents of Donatism and the Donatist teaching. Wrestled with many initial controversial subjects, but his wisdom guided him, and his opinions became very popular. Cyprian of Carthage, in dealing with a lot of the North African Donatist stuff and all, was a huge light in the early church. Nicholas of Myra. Now, he's actually later on. We're going to see much more of him next century. Nicholas of Myra was also known as Santa Claus. Saint Nicholas was a bishop in Turkey and defended the faith against Arius, who again will come soon. He's born here, that's why I'm covering him here, but he really comes into his own next century. He was exiled and persecuted, perhaps more than any other bishop, for a struggle against Arianism. So Saint Nicholas is also known for leaving leaving coins for poor children in their stockings. He is, later on, he apparently has flying reindeer, but not yet. Very good. That comes to the end of 300s.
Well done.
All right. How are we doing time-wise? So about 15 minutes. Any questions on what I've covered? So what I covered this evening?
Father, if you don't mind, I'm having to spend 30 minutes trying to find the link to this thing. So that's why I'm late all the time. If you may be able to help me with that, I would sure appreciate it after class.
Okay. So I will do you have my let me give you my email address.
Yes,
Uh
I do have it, Father. Yes.
you have it. Very
I
good.
said,
Then if you
yeah,
can send
please.
me an email to remind me, I will send it to you directly. I'm hoping um so what again, I don't have your email addresses right now. I'm going to get on Father Patan about this and make this happen over the Christmas break
I
so that
sent
I
all the
have
email addresses to you.
what's this?
I sent all the email addresses to you.
Did you? Wonderful. You are very useful. Thank you. Um, I will send you. What I will do is I will put together an appointment, a calendar appointment with the link in it, and I will send it to all of you. And I will do that before our next class.
Well
Um,
done. Thank you,
so
Father.
yeah, so it'll be right there. You
Uh,
can open your calendar up, and there's the link, and you can go right to it. So I'm sorry that this is I'm kind of new to teaching via Zoom as well. I do meetings in Zoom, but as far as presenting and this kind of stuff, I'm a little bit new to it, and sometimes I'll have a problem with the links as well. So I
uh,
completely understand that. Um, all right. you can still chime in with a question, but I'm going to begin. So again, I'm going to make sure that you have both all four sets of slides. So before the world leading up to Jesus, Jesus and the apostles, the first century, and again in the second century now. I'll make sure you have all of those. At some point, hopefully this week or beginning of next. I'm hoping this week, but we'll see. Um, and I will make sure you have the links to the video. The one was just you can has some violin music and you can see the Empire expanding. That's not nearly as exciting. The second one is very cute if you have not seen it, going into the different heresies. Is very well done, and the readings also, that you can take a look at the readings, and we will discuss those a little bit. I'm not going to go into great depth on them. It's mostly for your information, but they are you should read them if you want to understand the early church and how it develops. All right, so if there are no more questions, I am going to let you off at 7:46 here. Does anybody have any other questions? I tried to move slowly through that. I realize it's a lot of information. I tried to go slowly so you can absorb it here. Obviously, you're not going to memorize it, and you're not it would not be expected to. And what I will do, again, I'm going to see if we can make sure these slides are available to you. If the website is not built by just after Christmas, I'm gonna go in and do it. We need something because this idea of um, but I will do is, if I find out that we're not going to have it within the end of the week, what I will do is I will take it. I will simply give you guys viewer permission to look at the slide. It's on a Google Drive, so you will have
Okay.
access to them. You will have access to them by Christmas. If it isn't directly in a website set up for that, then I will just go ahead and give you access to the Google Drive.
Thank you, Father.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Any questions, thoughts, comments, or bad
Uh,
jokes?
Comment?
Yes.
Father, I believe I recognized you and certain other clergy at the uh, induction, promotion, I'm not sure, ordination of a monk.
Yes, that was I so I one of the reasons why, and you're going to get more than your fair dose of monasticism in this class, because I spent 10 years as a monk myself. I was a
Wow,
Benedictine,
wow.
a
Okay.
Dominican, and a
oh,
Carthusian.
oh,
And
stop me.
a young man that I met several months ago said, "I'm interested in monasticism in Anglican." And I'm like, "Well, I can walk you through it." And he made retreats and everything else if anyone wanted to do it. So I said,
Yeah.
"Well, I'll help you get started." So he came out, and he is actually at my parish, and we have a downstairs there. We've cleaned up. It has some rooms for cells, and I'm teaching him how to do it. And he went ahead and the bishop came out, and we had the vesture ceremony, and he was tonsured. Um, into religious life, and the monastery will not stay at my parish. It will someday be in its own building. But I know how to do it. I was a monk for many years, and so I am teaching him the ways and means of monasticism, and he will eventually this. We have a few other people who are reaching out, interested in making retreats, and we're looking to restart monasticism in the Anglican world. So yes,
Excellent. Most
I would.
excellent. I remember a visiting monk brought up Episcopal, and there was a fellow called the Reverend Brother Dunstan, I think was his name.
Ah, yes,
Uh,
Dunstan. We will cover
yes,
him at some point in future
really,
class.
he was a delight. Even though I was very young, he had an excellent sermon, and he began it by asking the congregation, "All right, show of hands, who here wants to be a saint?" The only guy who said yes was my father. Was the rector. Of course, he cheated. He had some more insights on it, but I was so delighted to see that. That's rich and beautiful.
Wonderful. I'm glad you enjoyed. We'll keep putting out more information as others join and as things grow. But yes, I was I'm honored to be able to use my experience to help this get started, and I'm
Yeah.
looking for. It's a lot of fun working with them.
He was the guy you brought to the men's retreat, right?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, good luck
Excellent.
to him and all of them.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, gentlemen. Last chance. All right. Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. I will see you Wednesday, just so we say it one more time out loud for everybody has it. Um, Wednesday, January 7th. I will see you then.
Excellent.
Thank you,
All right.
Father.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Father. Blessed day.
Bye.
Thank you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. Father, I'm still here. Father, I'm sorry for asking. You want to send me a link if you can. He signed off. No problem.